Thank you, Robert, and hello, everybody. I too would just like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today. I'm on Wurundjeri land, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. Thank you. So I spoke with this group on some qualitative work that we'd done exploring how people link health and climate change. I did that about 6 months ago, I think earlier in the year. And that was, like I said, just qualitative work where we spoke to about 60 people in focus groups and in-depth interviews, because we wanted to understand how people linked health and climate change, because, you know, we knew that climate change was getting a lot more coverage in the media, but we just didn't think that people were making the connection. So we'd done that exploratory research, which I shared, and then this is the largest study. So we knew that there were many voices warning of the climate change health impacts. For instance, the World Health Organization was saying climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. The Lancet were doing annual reviews against some health markers looking at climate change impacts. And then more local, in Australia, the AMA and the RACP were putting out statements. You know, they were ringing the alarm bells saying that we really need to be on to the potential health impacts of climate change. But we knew from our qualitative research the public just weren't making a link with these two things. So when you asked people to think about the climate change impacts, they would say rising cost of energy, environmental damage, extreme weather and hotter summers, but health just didn't really get a look in. So this was our statewide piece to really get some hard measures on levels of awareness between the link of health and climate change. We wanted to understand what type of health conditions people were thinking about when you ask them to think about climate change impacts. And we also wanted to get some measures from healthcare professionals. We wanted to see what they were actually already seeing in the community and what kind of conditions they thought might become more common as health impacts, as climate change impacts increased. We also looked at measures about on emotional responses connected to climate change, looked at quality of housing and how that might impact health, and then we asked about expectations of action and people's desire to know more about health and climate change. So we had a big sample for this study. We interviewed over 3,000 Victorians, though it was an online survey. The sample was representative of the Victorian population, and we included respondents 15 years and above. And to ensure that we spread the sample across all the state, we did a minimum of 100 interviews in each region. And like I said, we also wanted to see what healthcare professionals were seeing in their communities already, and just get their attitudes and views on health impacts of climate change. So we included over 700 healthcare professionals. That's made up of over 100 GPs, over 300 nurses, 75 allied health professionals and 50 medical specialists. We also had people working in residential aged care, health promotions officers and other healthcare workers, but they're not in as big a numbers as those, because we can actually analyse those separately. So one of our first findings was we know that Victorians rank health as one of their top priorities. When you ask them what types of things are important to them, health always comes first, yet 90% of them haven't thought about how their health might be affected by climate change. So we have an open question asking them to think about all the types of impacts that climate change might have, and this is spontaneously only 11% mention that it might impact their health. When we ask them to think about the future impacts of climate change and how they might be affected, 17% then mention health. The only difference we find in the data is with that young group, the 15 to 24-year-olds. It's more likely to be in their minds than on average within the average population. So for that younger age group, 18% mentioned health as one of the ways they might be impacted currently by climate change impacts. And when we ask them to think about the future impacts of climate change, about a third of that younger age group mentioned climate change. So although they're not accepting, although they don't think about it spontaneously, that connection, when you prompt them, when you have a list of all the potential types of ways that they might be impacted by climate change, and you ask them to tick to select the main ones, they do recognise that their health will be impacted. So 58% of Victorians recognised health as one of the main ways they're likely to be affected by climate change. So you can see there they've got cost of living first, the healthy environment, impacts to the environment second, but then they do recognise that their health will be impacted. Again, we see the difference with that young group. For them, 75% mentioned health as one of the main ways they're going to be impacted by climate change. And that was their top way that they felt they'd be impacted. So again, that difference is coming through for that younger age group. But if you ask healthcare professionals, 84% say that climate change is already harming public health. So 84% say it's already harming it now, and a quarter say that it's harming it a lot. But when you ask them to think about the next 10 years, 9 in 10 healthcare professionals say that public health will be impacted, and over half, so 57%, are saying the impacts will be quite significant. And healthcare professionals tell us they're already seeing climate change related health conditions in their community. So we ask them to mark the kinds of conditions that they're seeing or they know have happened or occurred in their local area. So 68% are aware of or were seeing impacts of related to thunderstorm asthma. 64% were seeing heat stroke or heat stress caused by extreme heat waves. 62% were seeing pollen-related allergies, etc. Then we could pull the data apart to see if healthcare professionals in metropolitan areas were seeing things that were a little bit different to those in the regional areas. And what we saw makes sense. So healthcare professionals in metropolitan areas are more likely to be seeing lung complaints from air pollution. And healthcare professionals in regional areas are more likely to see health concerns caused by drought, bodily harm from bushfires, smoke inhalation, and more likely to see diseases caused by insects, Ross River and Barmah forest virus. And just so you know, the timing of this research was before the summer bushfires. So this was done late last year. So it was before those massive fires and the impacts on our quality of air. We also asked healthcare professionals about the health conditions they thought would become more common as climate change impacts took hold. And each one of those health conditions increased. So 90% of healthcare professionals in Victoria think that heat stress and heat stroke will become more common. 86% think that lung complaints from increased air pollution will become more common. 83% think thunderstorm asthma will become more common, etc. So there's a big lift in all those health conditions, with doctors saying, well, healthcare professionals saying they're likely to become more common. The biggest jumps, though, were in heat stress and heat stroke. That makes sense. But the other one to jump up the highest was mental health. So there's real concerns that's really the impacts of climate change are going to increase it's going to have impacts on mental health. And with these conditions too, we've given this research to doctors of the environment and also to Department of Health and Human Services to sense check it. We say, look, do they agree? Are these the types of things that will become more common? And they do say that all these health conditions, according to everything that they've seen, they do agree that the views that have come back from our survey are backed up by what they're seeing as well. So we wanted to know what kind of things the public were thinking about when we asked them about the health conditions that might be impacted due to climate change. And you can see there, so we've got the health professionals in the light green and we've got the public in the dark green. So you can see there the public's view of health conditions that will become more common due to climate change differs significantly from the views of the healthcare professionals. So while we've got the majority of healthcare professionals saying we'll see more heat stress and heat stroke, we've got less than 2/3 of the Victorian population thinking that that condition will increase. And that's the case for nearly all of these conditions. There's there's only 2/3 or a half of the population that think these conditions will become more common. So the way we interpret this is that there's an awareness gap. You know, the health workers are saying that these conditions are going to become more common, but the public just aren't switched on to it. You know, there's a gap in public awareness of about a third. And the thing that matters is it's not just a third of the public aren't aware that heat stress and heat stroke is something that they need to be aware of. They need to prepare against, you know, if they need to protect themselves against it, they need to have knowledge about it. They need to be aware of it. But the thing is, it's not just a third that don't have any of that awareness. When you look at the subgroups within that third that lack awareness, they're more like that third is more likely to be made up of older people and younger males. And from information and studies done overseas, those two subgroups are the most likely to be impacted by heat stress and heat stroke. So it's not just that gap in awareness that's important, it's who is in that, you know, what kind of population makes up that lack of awareness, because they could be the ones most at risk. So this information is telling us that we really need, you know, a public awareness campaign on the health impacts of climate change. I looked at the data from the healthcare professionals in your area, in your region, and these are the types of things that they're saying they're seeing now. So, you know, dry conditions have brought an increase in respiratory illness, hay fever and asthma. They're seeing overheating and heat stress in the elderly due to the costs of power. Then they're seeing asthma exacerbated, but, you know, the bulk there is mental health. They're all, you know, a lot of them are triggering mental health as something they're seeing more of. We also had a set of questions just to ask about the emotions people feel when they're thinking about climate change, because we know that there's a lot of talk about eco-anxiety, and so we wanted to just get a measure of the underlying emotions that might be feeding into that. So this is top level, so 75% of Victorians are feeling some level of frustration when they think about climate change, 72% are feeling some level of sadness, 70% are feeling despair, and, you know, 2/3 are feeling outrage or fear. But the thing that we're mostly interested in is the proportions of people who feel those negative emotions at an overwhelming level. So they feel these emotions beyond, you know, moderate. So they're feeling them a lot or at extreme levels. So we can see all the emotions here. The grey bar represents the percentage of Victorians who feel that emotion at an extreme level, and this green bar is that younger age group, the 15 to 24-year-olds, and that's the proportion who feel that emotion at an extreme level. So we can see from this that emotional responses are strongest among the young Victorians, aged 15 to 24, and we've seen in the other slides that they're the ones that are more likely to have this issue top of mind, and they're more likely to think about it more, and they know more about it than the rest of the population. And so we can see there that that's not doing them any favours in terms of mental health. So 48% hold strong or overwhelming feelings of frustration, and 40% are feeling strong or overwhelming feelings of sadness and fear. We also had other measures just to ask them to self-report about emotional feelings of being overwhelmed. And 41% of Victorians say they feel overwhelmed when thinking about the future impacts of climate change. But again, for younger people, that's 59%. And something else we found that we weren't really expecting was that high level of feeling emotionally overwhelmed among healthcare professionals. So 79% of healthcare professionals say they feel overwhelmed when thinking about the future impacts of climate change. And then if you look at that younger cohort of healthcare professionals, it goes up to 84%. So I think this is something that healthcare, you know, associations and health groups need to be aware of. We had a set of questions asking about housing. We can see that healthcare professionals identify housing quality as an area for attention, because the bulk of healthcare professionals identified people in poor quality housing as one of the most vulnerable groups in relation to climate change impacts. And 95% of healthcare professionals say that the quality of housing and its capacity to keep people warm or cool will become more important as extreme temperatures increase. And 77% of healthcare professionals report that cold or heat exposure due to thermal quality of housing is already a problem in Victoria, and 40% say it's a major problem. And we could look at the data across locations, but we also could look at the data in terms of the types of housing people were in, and we can see that the thermal quality of housing is particularly problematic for those in public housing. So 2/3 of Victorians in public housing said their home was too hot last summer, 61% said it was too cold last winter, and 45% said that at some time in the last 12 months, they've had to actually get out of their house because it's too hot or too cold to stay. And when they have to leave their houses, they go to shopping centres, friends' place, movie theatres, swimming pools, libraries and community centres. So this is something that local governments and local community groups really need to be aware of and to plan for as we get more extreme weather events, because we know that some local governments are already trying to plan for safe spaces. So if people's houses don't have that quality to keep them comfortable in extreme temperatures, they'll need to go to safe places. So, I mean, this data points to a real need of, the houses need to be retrofitted or improved. So we need programs that do that, as well as having safe places that they can go to if they don't have a house that will keep them safe. So we know too that the healthcare professionals are really engaged on this issue, and we're working with other organisations like CAHA and Department of Health and Human Services to help us get healthcare professionals on board to help spread the messages around health and climate change.
Excuse me, Dianna?
Yes.
Could you explain what CAHA is?
Oh, Climate and Health Alliance.
Thank you.
So it's an organisation that has a lot of the health groups, members of them, and they're strong on advocating for a whole of Australia-wide policy that looks at health policy based around climate change impacts. So 92% of healthcare professionals agree that climate change is a serious issue and needs immediate action, and over half say it's on their mind a lot of the time. 93% of healthcare professionals also think that the public needs to be better informed on the link between health and climate change, and most of them see a role for themselves in helping inform the public. But the fact is that only a quarter say that they currently discuss these issues with their patients. And this is probably because only 1 in 3 of healthcare professionals say that they feel sufficiently informed about the health impacts of climate change. And only 1 in 3 say they feel very comfortable communicating the health impacts of climate change with their patients or their community. So this is telling us that there's really, and also the information in the survey showed us that there was really strong support for more information and training across the board for healthcare professionals. So 84% of healthcare professionals say that health impacts, climate change and mitigation should be in the undergraduate curriculum for all health-related professions, and around 9 in 10 agree that health impacts, climate change and mitigation opportunities should be part of ongoing professional training. So this points to there's the need for some work and we're working with Melbourne University to sort of build in climate change impacts into the training that's happening for healthcare professionals. And Victorians also say their knowledge is low, so only 18% feel confident in their level of knowledge on the health impacts of climate change. It's a bit higher for the younger age group. But we know too that they're willing and they're interested in knowing more. So 3/4 want to know about the health impacts, obviously, so they can protect themselves. They want to know how to reduce emissions and help to stop climate change getting worse. And they want to know more about the behaviours that will benefit health and also help mitigate climate change impacts. And we know too that the Victorian public support action and government leadership. So, and we use this slide to show local governments that, there's public expectation that their local government and as well as the state government should be planning and looking at ways that they can support the public or their community to protect themselves against the impacts of climate change, and they should be taking action to stop it getting worse. So you can see here that 71, so we asked whether or not for each of those entities, do they think that these entities should be taking a leading role or a supporting role or no role at all in helping look at the health impacts of climate change. And you can see that most of the public think that each one of those entities should be doing something, whether it's a leading role or a supporting role, they should be taking action on health and climate change. And the thing that was interesting in this was see that response for local government. Over half of the Victorian public think their local government should be doing something about the health impacts of climate change. And we asked this question in our big perception study a few years ago, 3 years ago, and it wasn't about health and climate change, it was just on climate change action generally in the community. And the local government got about a third thought the local government should be leading. I mean, they all thought the local government should be doing something, but mostly in a contributing role, not leading. So I just thought it's really interesting when you bring the health into it that over half of the Victorians think their local government should be actually leading on that. And I know that the Shepparton Local Council is, just working on their climate emergency action plan. So we're going to be talking to them a bit later as well. And 71% of the Victorian population think it's cheaper now to act on climate change than pay the price later. So all in all, this is just a top level findings, but we think that it shows that there's 4 areas for opportunities and action. And so that's, we really need to increase awareness and knowledge of the health impacts of climate change. We really need to develop policies and programs focused on improving the thermal qualities of Victoria's houses, particularly public housing. So there's a lot of talk about that. We want to help facilitate, boost education and professional development for healthcare professionals, and we need to do something to support young people to act on climate change, because we know that acting is a way out, is a way that helps ease levels of eco-anxiety. So we're looking at ways that we can do that, and we're talking to psychologists for a safe climate. They've got they're looking at workshops and ways that they can help young people as well. And that's it.
Well, thank you, Dianna.
You're welcome.
That was great.